Imagine a world born not from light, not from love, but from the very blood of the gods. A creation that began not with life, but with sacrifice. But the question is, if this world was created from the blood of gods, are humans, its creations, destined to repay it with their own blood?
Let's begin this investigation with an ancient text called Popol Vuh, this sacred book of the Maya, written in the Quiche language, hidden for centuries from Spanish colonizers. Within it, we don't just find a story of creation, but a spiritual map explaining how the universe works according to Maya belief. For the Maya, the universe was not empty space. It was alive. The sky, the earth, the underworld, they were all connected, and at every layer, gods maintained the balance between life and death. Yet, what is most striking is this: the world we walk on now is not the first. According to the Popol Vuh, the world has been created and destroyed multiple times. Each previous world failed because its creations could not honor the gods. In the Maya creation story, the gods debated how to create the perfect human, a being who could speak, think, and pray. They first tried creating humans from clay, failure, then from wood, another failure, until finally the gods realized one thing: life could only come from sacrifice. So they shed their own blood onto the earth. From that divine blood, true life emerged. And here lies the foundation of Maya belief. Blood is the essence of life, a bridge between humans and the gods. Blood is not just a symbol. It is a spiritual language connecting the mortal and the divine. Here, the mystery grows darker. If the gods created the world through their own sacrifice, does that mean humans must do the same? Pay for their existence with blood? Archaeologists have uncovered evidence that shakes the modern world. At the ruins of Chichen Itza and Copan, stone altars stained with iron red marks, and carvings depicting kings or priests cutting themselves, letting their blood flow into ceremonial vessels. This was not cruelty without reason. It was a sacred ritual believed to maintain cosmic balance. For the Maya, every drop of human blood reflected divine sacrifice. Without it, the sun would not rise, the earth would lose its soul, and the gods would turn away from humanity. Within sacred pyramids, researchers found murals depicting the Tree of Life, a cosmic symbol stretching from the underworld to the highest sky. At its top, a divine bird, symbolizing consciousness and the heavens. In the middle, the human world, where blood flows and time turns. Below, Xibalba, the underworld filled with spirits and death gods. Every part of this tree is connected by a single element: blood. Blood from above gives life to the world below, and blood from below, human sacrifice, sustains the heavens. An eternal cycle where life and death trade places in a cosmic dance. Yet one major question lingers. Did the Maya truly believe their gods demanded human blood? Or was it merely a human interpretation of divine myth? Some scholars argue that sacrifices were not commanded by the gods, but were humans imitating divine creation, a form of worship through imitation. Meaning, humans were not required to shed blood, they simply believed it was the only way to stay connected. But on the other hand, archaeological evidence, ritual carvings, and records from the Itza people show that the practice truly occurred, carried out with full conviction without fear. Imagine if time was not a straight line, but an endless circle. And in every turn of that circle, the world could be born, then destroyed, then born again.
This was the belief of the Maya. The time was not merely ticking seconds, but the very heartbeat of the universe. But the question is, did they truly measure time, or were they secretly shaping the fate of the world through their calendar? Archaeological research shows that the Maya were not just farmers or pyramid builders. They were sky scientists. They watched the stars, tracked planetary movements, and created calendar systems that, even today, amaze the modern world. There were two main calendars in their cosmic system. Ha'ab, the solar calendar with 365 days, and Tzolk'in, the sacred calendar of 260 days, which they believed followed the rhythms of human birth and spiritual cycles. When these two calendars met at a single point, it created a grand cycle called the calendar round, which repeated every 52 years. And each time this cycle ended, the Maya believed the world stood at the edge of destruction, or rebirth. To the Maya, time was not a lifeless object. It was alive, breathing, and possessing will. Every day, every month, every year had its own soul. Some days were blessed, some were dangerous. And Maya priests were tasked with interpreting time's will, when to plant, when to go to war, and when to shed blood. They believed when the stars shifted position, the world could lose balance, and the only way to calm the cosmos was by giving an appropriate offering. In many stone inscriptions, we find records of solar and lunar eclipses, seen as signs of owed blood. Eclipses were not ordinary natural events. They were moments when the sky itself seemed swallowed, as if the sun god was wounded by the forces of darkness. And whenever this happened, kings and priests performed sacrifice rituals, letting blood flow from their own bodies or from captured prisoners. To us, this may seem cruel, but to the Maya, it was heroic. They believed that with blood, they helped the sun god fight darkness and kept the world turning in its cycle. Yet, there was something far more complex beneath it all. The deeper we investigate, the clearer it becomes that sacred calendars were not just religious tools, but instruments of power. Mayan rulers and priests were the only ones who truly understood how to read the sacred cycles. They could predict when the gods would be angry, when the heavens demanded blood, and when the people must pay their cosmic debt. In other words, the calendar became a political weapon. Imagine, if a king wanted to strengthen his rule, he could simply declare, "The stars speak," that the gods demanded sacrifice, and only through the bloody rituals he led could the world be saved. To the people, this was not propaganda. It was sacred truth. At the sacred cities of Tikal and Oxmal, archaeologists discovered stone observatories perfectly aligned with the positions of the sun and moon during the solstices. Here, the Maya watched the skies, tracked Venus's cycles, and marked moments when heaven and earth touched. Every anomaly, every small shift in the sky was interpreted as a warning from the gods. So, if a volcano erupted or the sky turned red at midnight, it was no coincidence. To them, it was a sign that nature demanded balance. And that balance was always paid with blood.
Sun God is pleased. We offer this heart.
Under the golden red glow of the setting sun, thousands gather at the base of a stone pyramid. At its summit, a priest stands, an obsidian knife in hand, facing a living human whose body trembles, eyes fixed on the sky. Seconds later, the knife pierces the chest and a still beating heart is lifted to the heavens, offered to the gods. To the Maya, this was not murder. It was food for the gods. But the question remains, were the gods truly hungry for blood? Or were the ones holding the knife at the top of the pyramid the hungriest of all? In Maya civilization, blood was more than a life force. It was cosmic fuel. They believed that the gods who created the world had sacrificed themselves, shedding their blood so the sun could rise and the earth could breathe. Thus, to keep the world in balance, humans had to repay it with their own blood. This ritual was called chab, a form of offering that could be personal, such as cutting the tongue, ears, or genitals, up to the grandest form, human sacrifice at the top of a pyramid. The place of sacrifice was never random. It always took place at the top of the temple pyramid, where, according to belief, heaven and earth met. Priests wore deep red robes, adorned with jaguar masks and quetzal feathers. They danced, prayed, and chanted ancient mantras, voices echoing among the stones and kneeling bodies below. Then, a prisoner was lifted, hands bound, chest opened with a sharp obsidian blade, and their heart was held to the sky before the body was lowered to the pyramid base. Blood dripping from the altar was believed to fertilize the earth, and the rising incense smoke carried the victim's spirit to the god's realm. This is not mere legend. At sites like Chichen Itza, Palenque, and Copan, archaeologists found stone altars stained with iron oxide, chemical traces indicating human blood. On some pyramid steps, carvings depict the sacrificial procession, kings seated on thrones, priests raising knives, and blood flowing downward, forming rivers of red. Even more shocking, beneath pyramids, sacred wells, cenote sagrado, contained hundreds of human skeletons, including children. All were sacrificed in the same way, to appease Chak, the god of rain and sky. For the Maya, blood was not just an offering. It was a spiritual language understood only by the gods. When blood dripped into a stone bowl, it was not just a sacrifice, it was a message to the gods that humans remembered, were loyal, and were willing to give a part of themselves to sustain the world. In their logic, the gods did not demand, humans offered voluntarily. And therein lies the mystery. Was this ritual truly sacred devotion, or an illusion created by those who understood human fear? Look deeper, and blood sacrifice was not only to appease the gods, it also reinforced the power of priests and rulers. Priests were the bridge between humans and the heavens. They decided when the gods were hungry, who should be sacrificed, and how the ritual should be performed. They were not just guardians of faith, but architects of power. To the people, participating in the ritual was submission to the gods. But to the king, it was a political stage, showing he could feed the sky and keep the world in balance. In other words, blood was not just food for the gods. It was fuel for human power. So who was truly hungry for blood? The gods, who created the world through sacrifice? Or humans, who turned blood into a tool to control each other? Archaeological evidence may be silent, But the stone altars atop Maya pyramids still speak of humans who believed that to keep the world alive, someone had to die. Imagine an ancient stone stadium surrounded by thousands holding their breath. Two teams fight fiercely, not for gold, but for the gods. A rubber ball as heavy as a human head bounces between stone walls, and every bounce is a wager between life and death. Because at the end of the game, the winner, or the loser, no one knows for sure, will lose their head. But to the Maya, this was not punishment. It was divine honor. The question is, why could death be considered the highest gift? This game went by many names, pok-tapok, pits, or juego de pelota. But for the Maya, the ball game was not just a sport. It was a sacred ritual, a symbol of the battle between life and death, between the sun and darkness, between gods and humans. Ball courts were found in nearly every major city: Chichen Itza, Copan, Tikal, El Tajín, each built like an ancient gladiator arena, with tall stone walls and stone rings through which the ball had to be thrown without using hands. But what made it extraordinary was not the rules, but its meaning. The game was believed to reenact a sacred story from the Popol Vuh, where the hero twins, two twin brothers, played ball against the death gods in Xibalba, the underworld. According to legend, the death gods invited the hero twins to play, not just a game, but a spiritual test. Every bounce of the ball symbolized the cycle of the sun and moon, and every point was a small victory of life over darkness. When the hero twins finally defeated the death gods, they were sacrificed, but then resurrected as the sun and the moon. From this, the belief arose: death is not the end, but a path to eternal life. Thus, in the real world, every game of poke-to-poke became a cosmic ritual, repeating the story of creation. And the blood shed at the end of the match was an offering to feed the gods, ensuring the world kept turning. Even today, archaeologists debate, was it the winner or the loser who was sacrificed? In the reliefs of Chichen Itza, there are carvings showing a ball player being decapitated, but strangely, from the severed neck, not blood, but serpents and stalks of maize sprouted toward the sky. This symbolized not death, but rebirth. For the Maya, maize was the symbol of life. Thus, the player's sacrifice was not an end, but a transformation from mortal human to part of the cosmic cycle. Some scholars believe it was the winner who was sacrificed. Only the best, the purest, were worthy offerings to the gods. Others argue the opposite, that the loser was sacrificed as atonement for failure, a symbol of darkness defeated by light. At the Chichen Itza ball court, the 168-meter-long field still stands, and its walls are covered with reliefs telling this story. We see 6 players on each side, with one's head severed and 7 serpents shooting from the neck, each carrying seeds of new life. Archaeologists also found traces of blood near the court's altar and small obsidian tools believed used for ritual decapitations. Nearby, offering pits contained folded remains of adolescent boys, possibly players sacrificed after their final match. All of this confirms that the ball game was not mere entertainment. It was a spiritual ceremony, a theater bridging the human world and the realm of gods. In modern civilization, we see death as an end, But to the Maya, death was a sacred transaction. Life is given and must be returned in time. They believed that by dying on the court's altar, the player's soul would be reborn in the gods' realm, becoming light in the sky or rain that nourishes the earth. In other words, sacrifice was victory. And perhaps that is why their faces in the reliefs do not show fear, but serenity. So why was death considered a gift? Because to the Maya, only through death could life continue. For them, blood was not the end of existence, but a gateway to eternity. And the sacred ball game was merely a mirror of the greatest game in the universe, the eternal struggle between light and darkness.
We give this heart to the sun.
Imagine a king standing atop a stone pyramid, his body draped in shimmering quetzal feathers. In his right hand, a blade of obsidian. In his left, a human heart still beating. Below, thousands kneel and roar in unison, while incense smoke curls into the crimson sky. To the Maya, this was not brutality, it was balance. But the question is, were all those spilled drops of blood truly for the gods, or for something far more earthly? Power. In the Maya belief system, a king was far more than a political ruler. He was the Ajau, the one illuminated by the sun, the guardian of cosmic order. His duty was not only to govern people, but to maintain the delicate bond between humans and the divine. If droughts struck, if plagues spread, or if the sun darkened during an eclipse, it meant the king had failed his cosmic duty, and such failure could unravel the entire universe. Thus, every royal action, every political decision, every drop of blood spilled in ritual was seen as a sacred act to ensure that the sun would rise again the next morning. The Maya believed that blood was the language of the gods, and whoever could speak through blood held ultimate power. Kings performed auto-sacrifice rituals, piercing their ears, tongues, even their genitals, to draw sacred blood onto strips of bark paper, which were then burned into smoke offerings. That smoke, they believed, opened a doorway to the heavens, through which the gods and ancestors would descend to bless the realm. But as kingdoms grew larger, so did the hunger for blood. Private rituals evolved into grand public ceremonies, and there, the line between faith and politics began to blur. Carvings at Yaxchilan and Palenque depict haunting scenes. The king standing proudly with the severed head of his enemy, while his queen beside him performs a bloodletting rite. Around them, the people kneel, weeping, worshipping, and rejoicing. But these were not just records of victory, they were sacred propaganda, a divine performance meant to send one message: the king is the living extension of the gods, and only through him can the world survive. Each public sacrifice became a theater of power. Blood was not just an offering, it was a royal signature written in crimson. When a king died and his heir took the throne, a massive ritual followed, and blood always had to be spilled. This rite was known as the Katan Ending Ceremony, a marker of cosmic renewal and political transition. Hundreds, sometimes thousands of human lives were offered, as if the world itself required fresh energy to sustain a new era of rule. But beneath this sacred pretext lay a subtle, powerful message. The heavens approve this new reign. The new king did not merely inherit the throne. He inherited the divine contract with the gods, and blood
was the ink that sealed that contract.
Archaeological evidence supports this intertwining of faith and authority. Beneath major temples, like the Temple of the Inscriptions in Palenque, archaeologists discovered hidden chambers filled with human remains buried alongside royal tombs. Some skeletons bore marks of decapitation, while the walls were carved with images of kings descending into Xibalba, the underworld, a symbolic journey proving their divine legitimacy. But not every sacrifice was for cosmic balance. Some victims, it seems, were war captives or rebels. So we must ask, were these offerings truly for the gods, or a subtle way to remind the people what happens to those who dared to defy the throne?
So, who was truly thirsty for blood? The distant gods in the sky, or the kings who stood beneath the sun, using their names to sanctify their rule? To the Maya, a king was not just a leader, he was the axis of the universe. If he fell, the cosmos itself could collapse. But for us, centuries later, the question cuts deeper. Were the kings preserving the cosmos, or merely protecting their crowns? Imagine living under the shadow of a giant stone pyramid. Each sunrise, you hear the screams echoing from its summit, the cries of those sacrificed in the name of the gods. And amidst the smoke of burning incense and the heavy scent of blood, the king stands tall, smiling calmly. They say it's all for the balance of the world. But is it really? Or is there something far darker behind every drop of blood spilled on sacred ground?
In the Maya civilization, violence wasn't just the consequence of war. It was the language of power. Stone reliefs on great pyramids like those at Bonampak, Chichen Itza, and Yaxchilan depict shocking scenes. War captives kneeling with their hands bound, their eyes lifted to the sky, while priests prepare obsidian blades for sacrifice. Blood flowed down the temple steps, and the crowds below watched in silence, too afraid to look away. To the people, it was a sacred ceremony, but to the rulers, it was a performance of dominance. The Maya deeply revered their gods, but they also deeply feared them, and fear can be directed. The kings and priests understood this perfectly. Faith alone was never enough to control the masses. Each grand sacrifice was conducted in public view. Thousands were made to witness, so that no one would ever forget who held the power to speak to the gods. Here began one of the most subtle yet effective tools of control: propaganda through fear. If the gods can demand their blood, what chance do you, a mere mortal, have against the will of the king? Obedience, then, didn't come purely from faith, but from terror. Let's journey to Bonampak, a site in southern Mexico's Chiapas region, home to some of the most detailed murals of Maya royal life. On one temple wall, a sprawling scene unfolds. Naked captives kneel, their hands tied, blood dripping from beneath their fingernails. And in the center of it all, the king stands crowned in quetzal feathers, his gaze cold and unyielding. Archaeologists call these murals a documentary of power, not meant to please the gods, but to deliver a message. Look, this is what happens to those who defy thee. Bonampak was not merely a temple. It was a political stage where fear itself became the language of authority. Every great sacrifice was choreographed like a sacred performance. Music, dance, incense, the color of blood, and the roar of the crowd.
But over time, these ceremonies evolved from genuine acts of faith into ritual theater. The priests became spiritual directors, the king, the divine actor, and the stage, a massive stone pyramid where politics disguised itself as holiness. For the common people, the line between the sacred and the staged became increasingly blurred. As scholars Linda Shale and David Friedel once wrote, "To the Maya, blood was the symbol of life. But to their rulers, blood was a tool of power." Imagine the psychological impact. Children growing up watching human bodies offered to the gods. They were taught that the world would end if the sacrifices ever stopped. It was a near-perfect system of emotional control. When people believe their survival depends on the rituals, they will bow to anyone who claims the power to save them. And in that moment, the ritual of blood became the most effective political weapon in Maya history. So, were human sacrifices truly sacred rituals? Or were they grand political performances where blood became the script of propaganda? Atop the pyramids, between incense and screams, faith and fear merged into one. The gods may have never spoken, but the kings, they knew exactly how to make their people believe that their voice was the voice of heaven. Under the tropical sun of the Yucatan, the ruins of a sacred city stretch out before you. Chichen Itza, a place that once shook the ancient world. But amid the grandeur of pyramids and stone carvings, there's one place that sends chills down your spine. The Tsompantli, a rack of human skulls lined up like a monument to those offered to the gods. Who were they? Commoners? Prisoners of war? Or people chosen for reasons far greater than ourselves? The name Tsompantli comes from Nahuatl, meaning skull wall. It is a long stone structure, punctuated with holes where human skulls were mounted in neat rows. At Chichen Itza, this structure still stands, silent, yet staring directly at the pyramid of El Castillo. Each skull once belonged to someone who lived, breathed, and one day was sacrificed. Archaeological records reveal dozens, even hundreds of skulls, each with a story left untold, a life silenced before it could speak. For decades, researchers assumed Maya sacrifices were merely local war captives, but recent studies using DNA and isotope analysis have turned this assumption upside down. The results are staggering. Victims came from far-flung regions, from highlands and distant coasts across Mesoamerica. They were not from a single tribe or city, but brought from different lands, as if chosen for purposes still shrouded in mystery. Were they captives of intercity wars? Or did they come voluntarily to fulfill a sacred calling? The first theory suggests they were prisoners of war. The Maya often fought city against city, and capturing enemies was considered proof of spiritual victory. But a darker theory suggests some victims were chosen ritually. Young adults, virgins, or people with certain divine traits may have been seen as sacred messengers to the gods. They were prepared, bathed, dressed in ceremonial garments, even honored, before ultimately being sacrificed. Ironically, in Maya culture, such a death was not considered tragic, but the highest honor. They weren't killed, said one archaeologist. They were transformed into part of the universe. Near the Tsompantli lies the Cenote Sagrado, a natural sinkhole believed to be a gateway to the underworld, Xibalba. Here, another mystery emerges. Hundreds of human bones have been found at its watery bottom. Some belonged to children and women, their bodies still adorned with gold and jade jewelry. Isotope analysis shows that many came from distant regions, even beyond the Yucatan Peninsula. They were not war captives. They came to surrender themselves. Was this a voluntary pilgrimage to death, or a meticulously planned sacrifice by the religious elite? No one can say for sure. The waters of the cenote swallowed their secrets forever. When archaeologists examined the skulls, patterns emerged. Most were young, aged 10 to 20. Their faces do not show extreme suffering. Perhaps they were sedated or had accepted their fate. Even more striking, some skulls bear carvings of cosmic symbols, identical to those etched on the walls of Mayan temples. Were they mere victims or participants in a grander ritual? One meant not just as an offering, but to maintain balance between the human world and the realm of the gods. To this day, the Tzompantli at Chichen Itza stands in silence, as if still watching us from the past. The skulls do not speak, yet their existence proves that sacrifice and mystery walked hand in hand in a civilization both advanced and brutal. Imagine a magnificent civilization that could read the stars, build massive pyramids without metal tools, and record time thousands of years into the future. Yet one day, everything vanished. Cities lay in ruins, temples swallowed by jungle, and the drumbeats of war were replaced by silence. This is the greatest mystery of the ancient world, the collapse of the Maya civilization. But was their downfall caused by nature or by their own hands? Around the 9th century CE, at the peak of the classic Maya civilization, cities like Tikal, Palenque, Copan, and Calakmul were suddenly abandoned. Thousands vanished. Governments collapsed, and grand ritual systems ceased, as if their world had died. There are no records of foreign invasions, no massive eruptions, no global plagues. Yet the ruins they left behind show signs of gradual internal collapse. What really happened? Scientists have discovered that around 800 to 900 CE, the Yucatan Peninsula experienced extreme droughts lasting decades. For the Maya, water was more than a necessity. It was the soul of the world. When the sky stopped giving rain, they believed the gods were angry, and the only way to appease them was blood. Thus, sacrificial rituals grew more frequent, larger, and more brutal. Not only enemies of war, but sometimes even their own people were offered. Ironically, the more blood they spilled, the drier their land became. Sites like Caracol and Dos Pilas reveal evidence of massive civil wars at the end of the Classic period. Kings fought kings, cities fought cities, all competing to offer more blood to prove who was more blessed by the gods. Yet the outcome was the opposite. The faith of the people began to crumble. They saw priests call for rain with blood, but the sky remained dry. They saw kings promise balance, but all that came was war and famine. Faith turned to doubt. Obedience turned to despair. And in that moment, the Maya civilization began to collapse from within, not because of enemies, but because their rituals had lost their meaning. In cities like Uxmal and Saibal, archaeologists have found sharp increases in human sacrifices toward the end of the civilization. It is as if the priests grew ever more desperate. Some stone inscriptions depict kings performing blood rituals even as their people starved. Incense continued to burn, obsidian blades continued to draw blood, yet the world around them fell further into ruin.
Did they realize that rituals, once symbols of life, had become the poison killing their own civilization? As the cities were abandoned, the tropical jungle began reclaiming land once conquered by humans. Trees grew over pyramids, roots penetrated once sacred temples, and in the silence, the Maya gradually disappeared from the pages of history. But did they truly vanish, or did they merely hide within time? Their descendants still live today, preserving language, legends, and even ancient rituals, though in quieter, more hidden forms, perhaps more peaceful than before. So, did the Maya civilization collapse because of a harsh nature, or because of their own obsession with blood and power? Perhaps the sacrifices they made were no longer to protect the world, but to mask their fear of falling. And in the end, the blood once offered to balance the cosmos became the red ink that wrote the final chapter of their own civilization.